All right, guys, we're going to take a look at the notes from section 3.1, Factoring Strategies Review. Maybe you've done some of this stuff in Algebra 1, but we're going to go over some of these things just as we start this new unit, which we'll need to know how to do some factoring. So, number 1 here, okay, what we're doing here is you're given an expression with the factor at the greatest common factor, the GCF, in each expression. All right, sometimes that'll include just numbers, just integers, a constant, and sometimes we'll have variables that we can take out too. So on number 1 here, I'll notice that each one of those 3 terms I can take out a 3. Okay, so what I can do is I can take a 3 out here. When I divide the 3 out of each term, we'll have to decide what we have left on the inside. Okay, or what do I need to multiply times 3 to get the original problem? On the first one, okay, I can multiply by x squared, right? We take out the 3 and it gives me an x squared. We multiply, now we need to decide what we multiply 3 by to get -6. That's going to be a -2x. And then finally, what do I divide? What do I get when I divide 3 out of -12? Would be -4. All right, just keep in mind here, I can kind of reverse the process to make sure that I got it right. Okay, I can check my work by taking 3 and then distributing it back through all 3 of those. And if you get the same thing that we started with, then you should be okay. Number 2, we end up having a problem where we're going to have to take out some variables too. So you'll notice that I can take out a 5 out of each one. Okay, but I can also take out an x squared. Okay, so I can take an x squared out of both of those as well. Okay, so the question here is, what do I take times 5x squared to get 5x cubed? Okay, the only thing we're missing there is an x, right? If I take 5x squared times x, it's going to give me 5x cubed. Okay, same thing with the second one. What do I take times 5x squared to get 15x squared? Okay, in this case, that's going to be a plus 3. Okay, again, you can always double check by distributing it back through and make sure you get the original problem there. All right, the third one here, okay, what we'll have here is a 24x squared times y minus 40xy. I look at the GCF of 24 and 40. Okay, the biggest number that goes into both of those numbers is going to be an 8. All right. Then I look at my 2 variables there. What's the highest power of x that I can take out? Okay, you'll notice the first term has an x squared, second one has an x. Okay, so I can take out one of the x's. All right, and you'll notice that I have a y in both of those, so I can take a y out. All right, so the question now is, what do I take times 8xy to get 24x squared y? What do I take times 8xy to get -40xy? All right, so on the first one, okay, I would need a 3 to multiply times 8 to get a 24. I would need an x to multiply times the x that I factored out to get an x squared. And then we already took the y out. Okay, so I would just do a 1 there, or in this case, I would just leave it as a 3x. Okay, for the second one, okay, what do I take times 8 to get a -40? Okay, I can just going to do a -5 here. All right, I already took an x out, I already took a y out, so I think it's just going to be a 3x minus 5. All right. All right, for the second one here, okay, what we have here is what's called a sum or difference of squares. And this means that both of these values in the expression are going to be perfect squares, and it's going to be subtracting. You'll see what this looks like here. Okay, so in the first one here, you can see that the pattern here is a squared minus b squared equals a plus b and a minus b. All right, so you'll have the same thing twice. The only difference is you're going to have a plus in one of the expressions and a minus in the other one. All right, so if I want to go ahead and set that up here, okay, I'll have my 2 sets of parentheses. Okay, what do I take times itself to get x squared? Okay, that'll be an x and an x. Okay, what number can I take times itself to get 25? It's going to be a 5 and a 5. In order to get a minus 25, one of these is going to be a plus, one of them is going to be a minus. Okay, you can always FOIL this back out if you're not sure that if you have the right answer. So this is my answer here, x plus 5 and x minus 5. But if it's helpful for you to FOIL this back out just to make sure that it ends up getting you the same thing you started with, that'd be good. Okay, so if I take x times x, that's going to give me x squared. Okay, now I do the outsides. minus 5x, the insides plus 5x, okay, and then minus 5 and positive 5 is going to give you a negative 25 there. Okay, and then what should happen is these two inside terms are going to cancel out. So we end up with a x squared minus 25. Okay, and that's just how we verify. Again, this right here was my final answer. Okay, but we can verify by FOILing it back out just to make sure. Okay, same thing for number 5 here. Okay, the idea here is I have two sets of parentheses. The only thing that should be different is a plus on one side and a minus on the other. Okay, so what do I take times itself to get 16x squared? Okay, the first part would be a 4 and then an x. 4x times 4x gives me 4x squared. And then the second one is going to be, what do I take times itself to get an 81? Okay, that'd be a positive 9, negative 9. Okay, and then what do I take times itself to get y squared? Okay, just a y. And again, if you feel better about FOILing that back out to make sure you have the right answer there, okay, you can do that. All right, same thing with the last one. Two sets of parentheses, one plus and the one minus. Okay, what do I take times itself to get 100? That'd be a 10. Okay, what do I take times itself to get x to the fourth? Okay, this is one where we have to take x squared times itself. X squared times x squared is just x to the fourth. That's when we have to add the exponents together, right? X squared times x squared is going to give me x to the fourth. Same thing with the second one here. Okay, so x squared, 10x squared times 10x squared gives me 100x to the fourth. Second one, what do I take times itself to get 1? Okay, hopefully that's fairly straightforward. Minus 1 and plus 1. All right. Moving on down to these ones down here. Okay, I'm not going to do all of these just for the sake of time because I know you guys have done these before in Algebra 1. Okay, but the idea here is we are breaking these up into our two sets of parentheses. Okay, all of these examples that you have here are going to be a regular x squared, okay, out in front. So which means what we're going to do is we'll have an x at the front and an x at the front here. We'll get into ones later where it's something other than just an x, but for right now, it's just going to be an x. Okay, the harder thing on this is we're looking for numbers. Okay, the numbers that follow this are going to be numbers that add to be the number in the middle and then multiply to be the number at the end here. So what we're looking for is two numbers that multiply to be a 12 and add to be a 7. If it's helpful for you to make a list of factors here of 12, all right, okay, I could come up with a 4 and a 3, a 2 and a 6, okay, and I'm looking for ones that add to be that middle number. In this case, I'm looking for ones that add to be 7, okay. Hopefully we're okay with this being a plus 4 and a plus 3, okay. And again, if you want to FOIL that back out just to verify that you got the right answer, okay, you can. I'm not going to here. Now, obviously, you're going to have ones where you have different combinations of pluses and minuses, so we should keep that in mind. Okay, I'm going to skip over here to number 9. If we have time, maybe we'll come back and do those ones. But two sets of parentheses. The first set's always going to be x and x. Okay, and the reason it's x and x is there's no other way to have two values multiplied to get x squared. Okay, so it's got to be an x and an x. Okay, and then what we're doing is looking for things that add to be positive 8 and multiply to be a negative 20. Now, the signs here are important. Okay, I can use cues from the signs to indicate what the options are going to be. Okay, I'm looking for numbers that multiply to be negative 20. Okay, so you'll notice here that I can do a negative 10 and a positive 2. I can also do a negative 2 and a positive 10. I could do 5 and negative 2. I can do negative 5 and positive 2. And I'm just looking for the ones there that add together to be a positive 8. Okay, in that case, it's going to be this one right here, positive 10, negative 2. And that's what we're looking for there. Okay, again, you can always go back and FOIL it out to make sure you got the right thing there. Okay, if you FOIL it back out and the sign in the middle is flipped, that means you flip the signs in the middle of your parentheses there. Okay, all right, we're moving on to factoring by grouping. Okay, the one thing that I'm going to mention to you in terms of factoring by grouping is that you have to have 4 terms to factor by grouping. So if you don't have 4 terms, there's no way you can factor by grouping. Okay, there'll be some, there might be something that I'll show you when we come back where you can factor by grouping with 3, but there's some things you have to change around. For right now, all you really need to know is that if we don't have 4 terms, we're not going to be able to factor by grouping. Okay, this is going to take into account some of the things that we've already done. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is group these into sets of 2. Okay, so I'm going to factor in I'm going to separate out the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to focus just on the first set of parentheses and the second set of parentheses, and we're going to factor out the greatest common factor. So I'm looking at just the first 2, and I'm saying, what can I take out of both of those terms? In this case, you'll notice that I have an x cubed and an x squared, so I can factor out an x to the power of 2. I can take out 2 x's here. And then just like we did the first step, or the first part of this video here, we're going to say, what do I multiply times x squared to get what's inside the parentheses here, or get what I started with? Okay, so in this case, what do I take times x squared to get x cubed? Okay, just an x. Okay, what do I take times x squared to get a plus 7x squared? Okay, and it'll be just a plus 7. Okay, you'll notice if I distribute that back through, it'll give me what I started with. Same thing with the second one here. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to factor out a positive 2. Okay, so I'll take out a 2 here. When I take out a 2, that'll leave me with an x. And then what do I multiply 2 times to get a positive 14? That'll be a plus 7. Okay, now here's what you're looking for when we do factoring by grouping. Okay, you'll notice here that I have the same thing twice. I have this x plus 7 twice. Okay, and actually when I factored this 2 out, I should have put a plus there, and that should be a plus 2, just to indicate that it's a positive 2. Okay, so what you'll notice here is that I can now take out an x plus 7 out of both of my terms that I have. You'll notice that if I think about this as being one term, and this as being my second term, that I have an x plus 7 in both of them. So if I factor out the whole thing, if I factor out this x plus 7 here, okay, what I have left is I take an x plus 7 out of this first whole big set of brackets here. I'm left with an x squared. Okay, and if I factor out an x plus 7 from over here, okay, I'm left with a plus 2. Okay, so the way that this is going to factor by grouping, okay, is I'll have an x plus 7, because that was the value in the parentheses that I had twice, all right? And then what was left when I took an x plus 7 out of both of those was an x squared plus 2. Now, you'll notice here that if I were to FOIL this back out, okay, you should get what you started with. Okay, if I went through and did first, outside, inside, last, okay, I should get this original problem that I started with here. Oh. Okay. All right, same thing with the second one. These ones are a little bit tricky to wrap your head around sometimes, so we'll go back and we'll do this one. Okay, so remember the first thing I'm doing is breaking these up into 2 sets of 2. Okay, and then I say, what can I take out of both an x cubed and a negative 6x squared? Okay, I think the only thing I can take out there is an x squared. All right, what do I take times x squared to get x cubed? It's going to be an x. Okay, when I take an x squared out of the second one, it'll be a minus 6. I think about what do I take times an x squared to get a negative 6x squared, and it's going to be a negative 6. Okay, same thing with the second one. Now you'll notice here that I have this minus sign here. I will, the hint that I'll give to you is anytime you have a minus sign in that second set of parentheses, you're going to factor out a negative. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to factor out a negative 4, right? Because I can take a 4 out of both 4 and 24. All right, and when I think about what I'm going to have left, okay, what do I take negative 4 times to get negative 4x? Just an x. Okay, and then what do I get when I factor out a negative 4 from a 24? That should be a minus 6, right? Negative 6 times negative 4 would give me a positive 24 there. All right, now you'll notice again, when we do this factoring by grouping, I should end up with the same thing twice. Okay, because if I end up with the same thing twice, then I can factor that x minus 6 out. Okay, so I take the x minus 6 out. All right, That's one of my factors. And then what's left? Okay, x squared, and then a minus 4. So my final answer here would be x minus 6 times x squared minus 4. If you're having trouble with why we factor, or why we have an x minus 6 just one time, okay, FOIL it out. Okay, multiply it through, distribute it through, and just see how it ends up with the same thing that you started with, and that might be helpful in terms of understanding kind of how this works. All right, but this will be my final answer right here. Okay. All right, 2 more problems here. Okay, now the last 2 here are going to be things where we have to do a couple of my different strategies here. So my first thing I'm always going to look for is there anything that I can factor out of each term? Is there any greatest common factor that I can take out of each one? And you'll notice the first thing that I notice here is that I think I can take a 5 out of each one of those 2 terms. So if I take a 5 out here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Okay, I'll take a 5 out, I'll be left with an x squared, right? 5 times x squared gives me 5x squared. And then I can divide an 80 by 5, and that should give me 16. So I end up with a x squared minus 16. Again, you can always FOIL it back out to make sure that you get the same thing you started with. All right, and now I can just focus on this second set of parentheses here, or the set of parentheses here. Okay, this actually, you'll notice, has the same pattern as that sum or difference of squares that we talked about earlier. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I can break this up into the 2 sets of parentheses. I'm going to pull my 5 down. We can kind of leave the 5 alone for a second. All right, we know that x times x gives me x squared. All right, and then since 16 is a square number 2, again, remember my pattern from the ones we did above. Okay, 1 plus, 1 minus. Okay, and then 4 times 4 is going to give me 16. All right, and again, I keep emphasizing this, but you can always FOIL that out if you want to make sure you get the same thing as what you started with. Okay, and that'll be my final answer there. All right, last one. Almost done here. Okay, so first thing I notice here is that I have 3 terms. On each of those, I should be able to take out a 2, and I should also be able to take out an x. So I'm going to take out a 2x from each of those 3 terms. Okay, when I take a 2x out of the first one, the only thing I'll have left is an x, right? 2x, or excuse me, I'll take an x squared, right? 2x times x squared would give me a 2x to the 3rd power. Okay, when I take a 2 out of 8, that'll give me a plus 4. And then I take an x out of x squared, that'll give me x. Okay, so 2x times 4x would give me 8x squared. And then finally, we take a 2 out of a negative 24x, and we get a negative 12. And then I take an x out of a 24x, and that'll leave me with just the 12 there. All right, so now we have we took a 2x out of each of those 3 terms, and now I should be able to break up my second expression here into 2 sets of parentheses. So I'm going to pull down my 2x, and I'll break this up into my 2 sets of parentheses. Remember, on a problem like this, okay, because this is an x squared, we'll have an x here and an x here, and we're looking for numbers that add to be the middle number and multiply to be the last number. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to be negative 12, that also add to be a positive 4. Okay, so in this case, I'll have a negative 6 and a positive 2, negative 2, positive 6. You could do my 4s, negative 4, positive 3, negative 3, positive 4. You could always do the 12s if you wanted to, negative 12, 1, negative 1, positive 12. The only one of those that's going to also add to be a positive 4 is going to be this one right here, which will be plus 6 and minus 2. And I think that is going to be my final answer here. All right, so that is it for the notes here. Hopefully this was helpful. You can go ahead and start working on the homework.